Hello, thank you so much for joining me today for our webinar titled Planning for Commitment. Today, we're going to talk about common mistakes people make when moving in with a partner or getting married and how to avoid some of those mistakes. First, I want to say thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate that you've taken a little bit of time to try and learn about decisions that you might have to make, tools you might have to create, and things you should think about if you or a loved one of yours is thinking about either getting married or cohabitating with a loved one. Now, this webinar is designed to address the laws of the state of Washington. So if you don't reside in the state of Washington, keep in mind that some of the advice that I'm giving today, some of the references I'm making might not apply to you. If you do live in Washington, you're in the right place. A little bit about myself. My name is Andrea Lee, and I'm an attorney at Legacy Estate Planning. I am an estate planning attorney. I am not a divorce attorney. I'm not a family law attorney. I actually am going to spend a little time talking about community property, prenuptial agreements, cohabitation agreements, but I actually don't draft those documents. However, I know a little bit about people and I know a little bit about the law. And I do know that if you are thinking of living with someone or if you're thinking about getting married, these are important issues that you should consider when making some of these decisions. I've been practicing law for about 17 years, so I've seen a lot of different circumstances over my time in the legal community. Legacy Estate Planning is exclusively an estate planning firm. We draft wills, we draft trusts, we draft powers of attorneys. We help people when they're facing very tough times, such as a loved one's disability or the death of a loved one. And through our practice, we've dealt with many families and with many people who have lived through many different circumstances. And I'm creating this webinar because I've seen a large number of clients come to me when they've encountered problems after they've gotten married, while they're going through a divorce, or after they've chosen to live with a loved one and learned that there were problems they could have avoided by simply thinking about and anticipating challenges they might face. So my goal for today is to educate you on some common and costly mistakes that people make when choosing to get married and or choosing to live with a partner. I'm going to try and offer you some easy solutions and ways to avoid some of the biggest problems people experience. And then I'm going to discuss some tools that you can put in place to protect yourself and to protect your loved ones. Now, I am taping this webinar during Women's History Month, but planning is for everyone. This webinar is geared primarily towards women, but the advice, the situations, and the circumstances that we're going to discuss apply to everyone out there, regardless of your gender. This is a picture of me when I got married. My 25th anniversary is approaching this coming summer, and my parents. And we have been fortunate enough to have many years of marital bliss and a large family. But we all understand that being married, living with someone is not easy. And it's extremely important for those of us who are entering into such an important commitment to plan ahead and to be adults in the situation and anticipate where problems might exist in the future. Tell my clients, estate planning and living together or making any decisions is frequently about hoping for the best and planning for the worst. So when you're anticipating future problems, you're not hoping for those problems. You're hoping they don't arise, but you're acknowledging that problems can arise and you want to mitigate any challenges that you might face with a little bit of thought and planning. Now, most of our clients are women. The reality is, in today's society, women tend to be the planners in every family. Now, there is clear exceptions to that rules. There are definitely men who are planners in their families, or maybe there is a couple where there are two men and one of them falls into that role of being the planner. However, traditionally, women are the ones who might plan vacations, the day-to-day schedule, and they're the ones who oftentimes will take action on creating or making legal decisions for their family. Further, today we're talking about how to protect yourself in circumstances such as marriage and cohabitation. And as society is shifting in today's world, young women are much more likely to be homeowners than young single men. Women are truly the growth in wealth that we're seeing over the next few years. And as women, we have to switch our thought process and determine that we are making the decisions that best protect ourselves and best protect the people that we love and care about. So taking charge of your decisions and your actions before you choose to live with someone or to marry someone oftentimes will fall on your shoulders as a woman. And today my goal is to provide you some guidance and tools. Remember, this applies to men as well. But the reason I'm creating this webinar is I specifically had a woman come into my office and say to me, when I got married 30 years ago, I was so naive. I didn't understand what I was getting into. And she was seeing me, she was still married, but she had learned of some traps she had fallen into over the years. And she said to me, can you please prepare a webinar for my daughters? I want them to not make the mistakes I made when I got married very young and where I put a lot of faith into a situation without understanding the decisions that I was making. So it was because of that client that I decided to create this webinar with the hope it will help not only women, but everyone who is considering getting married or living together. So what are some common mistakes that people make? First, oftentimes when people decide to move in together, they love each other so much, they're focusing on their love and they're focusing on the hope of their future relationship, and they don't talk about money. Next, they sometimes don't sit down and make a practical financial plan. What does living together look like? How are we going to meld our finances? How are we going to budget for our day-to-day expenses? Couples might decide that they don't want to enter into a prenuptial agreement, and they might not even know that cohabitation agreements exist. They don't discuss their future goals. They might not sit down and look at where are we hoping this relationship might be in 10 years. An individual might not understand the laws and the legal consequences they might face once they get married or once they live together. And then finally, so many people are jumping into a relationship, living together, or getting married, but they're failing to create an estate plan. It's extremely important that individuals, actually everyone should create an estate plan if they're over the age of 18. But if you're making that important decision to live with someone and to meld your lives together, it's even more important for you to sit down and make sure you have a plan in the event you pass away or become incapacitated. So mistake number one, couples don't talk about money. So let's be frank. If you are mature enough to live with someone, or if you're mature enough to marry someone, then you and the individual that you want to mix your life with should be able to sit down and lay it all out on the table. If you get married or live with someone, it's necessary that you sit down and you share with each other your income, your savings, your budgeting. You also want to disclose any past financial mistakes that you have made. Because when you live with someone, you're melding your finances. And it's necessary that you are frank with your partner about what it is that you are bringing into that relationship so you can have a fair discussion about what your future finances will look like together. You need to talk about what your saving habits are, what your spending habits are. It doesn't make sense if one of you wants to get Starbucks every day and the other wants to save some money by cooking at home. So sitting down and talking about what you're bringing into the relationship financially is very important. Now, this is even more important if you're getting married, because if you get married and one of you has filed for bankruptcy, it's a very low credit score, then that can definitely affect the ability of the two of you to purchase a home in the future. And one spouse's credit score can affect the ability for the other spouse to borrow money or to buy a car. Now, once you've sat down and you've laid all the money out on the table and discussed your financial situation, it's extremely important for you and your partner to create a financial plan. You may have an idea of what the future expenses that you're going to see immediately. You might know what the rent is that you're going to have, the utility payments, the water, sewer, garbage, and you need to sit down together and determine, how are we going to pay these bills? Are you going to open maybe one joint account and you're going to equally put money into that account, and that account is going to be responsible for your day-to-day payments? Are you going to look at the bills and divide them proportionately? If one of you makes $100,000 a year and one of you makes $50,000 a year, it's essential for you to sit down and have that conversation and say, is it fair if our rent is $2,000, but one of you makes substantially more, one of you makes substantially less, that you both contribute $1,000 a month to that rent? Now, there aren't right answers to these questions. However, it's essential for you and your partner to sit down and at least have these conversations. Second, you should talk a little bit about, well, what if financial circumstances change? What if you rent an apartment, buy a house, and one of you has a great job making more money, one of you makes a little bit less, and then the person who's making more loses their job, or they have a decrease in income? How do the two of you plan on addressing future financial challenges that you might face? In addition to just addressing simple day-to-day living costs and expenses, it's important for you to talk about all the other luxury items that you might be considering. Maybe one of you likes to go out to eat multiple times a week, and it's not hard on their pocketbook to pay for a meal out or to spend every weekend participating in expensive activities like skiing or sailing, whereas the other partner might not have adequate funds for all those extra activities. How do you think that you would pay for that? Is one of you willing to subsidize the other? And what would that look like for the two of you as a couple? What about vacations? How do you think you might pay for vacations and cover the cost of trips or other extracurricular activities that you might participate in together? A third mistake many couples make is they fail to sign prenuptial agreements, or they fail or even don't know about cohabitation agreements. I have heard people say, my prenuptial agreement is never getting divorced. But the reality is, once again, we're hoping for the best and we're planning for the worst. Entering into a prenuptial agreement doesn't mean that you love your spouse any less than anyone else. It doesn't mean that you plan on getting divorced. It simply says, my partner or my spouse and I have sat down, we've talked about money, we have had some very important conversations. So if we have disagreements in the future, while we love each other, we've developed a plan that we think is fair should we separate or have to get divorced. For those of you who aren't getting married, but who are considering living with a partner, it might be very important for you to enter into a cohabitation agreement. Cohabitation agreements simply state, if we live together, how are we going to divide up assets? Now, a cohabitation and a prenuptial agreement are even more important in circumstances when one or both of you own real property. What you might not know is that if you own your home and you consider it your separate property, or if you just live together, you consider it your separate asset, and you might think, I'm protecting myself by having my partner or my spouse live in my home, but I'm going to leave it in my name. Well, there's a very distinct possibility that over a period of time, if your partner or your spouse have been contributing to the maintenance of the home financially or through hard labor, that they are then earning a part of that home. So that if you were to separate or get divorced in the future, you might have to pay them off, because the simple fact that they resided there with you contributed to the maintenance and upkeep of that home. It could be implied that they are now a partial owner. These are important things to discuss with your partner, and then just to write it down. And that written agreement is what becomes a prenuptial agreement or a cohabitation agreement. The fourth mistakes that many couples make is they fail to sit down and have a frank discussion on their future goals and then to develop a plan to achieve those goals. First, you need to talk about why you're living together. Many people get married because they're in love with each other, and sometimes you live together. Hopefully you also love each other. But for some people, they might say, hey, you know what? We're spending nights at each other's homes so frequently. Let's save some money and get an apartment together, buy a house together. Let's live together because it's a practical decision. And maybe that's what one partner is thinking. Whereas the other partner might be thinking, we're in love. We're going to live together because we're going to be married in a few years. It's extremely important to sit down with your partner and say, what are our future expectations of this relationship? You don't want to find yourself in a situation where your understanding of the situation was you moved in together with the intent that you were marrying in a few years. Maybe your partner is over there thinking, hey, it's fantastic. We're living together. We're sharing a lot of money. Maybe they have no intent of getting married in a few years. Therefore, sitting down and having that conversation with your partner is a way to save yourself a lot of heartache down the line. Finally, if you are creating and developing large goals together as a partnership, as a married couple, it's important to sit down and make a plan on how that's going to happen. You can easily see in situations where a couple might sit down and say, hey, we have a future goal of buying a house, or maybe it's a smaller goal. Maybe it's, we have a future goal of traveling to Europe next summer. And one of you is saving a lot of money and squirreling away as much money as you can. And the other partner is saying, I don't think I'm going to have enough money to go to France while they're getting their 5th DoorDash delivery of the week. How do you plan to make those future goals happen? Money is one of the primary reasons of conflict between couples. And failing to have that important decision regarding the management of your money, why it's important to manage your money in a way that works together, and how you can achieve those future goals is one of the ways to avoid a conflict that many couples face in their relationship. A fifth mistake that we see so frequently in my office is that people don't understand the laws. And they don't understand how Washington state laws might affect their lives should they get married or should they live together. Most people understand that Washington state is a community property state. What that means is everything that is earned during your marriage is equally both of yours. So if you are married and you as a couple decide the husband's going to work, or maybe the wife is going to work and the other spouse is going to remain at home, half of the income that the working spouse earns belongs to that stay-at-home spouse. That's how community property is. However, some people believe that we're married. As soon as we get married, everything is community property. Everything is both of ours. The reality is anything that was brought into the marriage prior to that marriage is not community property. That is separate property. So we get back to the situation where a couple gets married, one of them owns a home before they get married, they live together in that home for many years, and then the question becomes, what happens if they get divorced? Neither of them might understand the laws and how that might affect how that house is divided. For example, maybe one spouse thinks, hey, it's my separate property. I owned it before I get married. I get the full house. Maybe the other spouse thinks, no, we lived in this house together for 20 years. It's community property. I should get half of this house. And the answer is neither are probably right. It's probably somewhere in the middle. But not understanding the laws that surround that community property can make you make decisions that are not in your best interest because you don't understand the consequences of those decisions. Another mistake people make is their understanding of cohabitation. Washington state is not a common law marriage state. We don't have common law marriage here. Some states have laws that say, hey, if you've lived together for a particular period of time and you kind of present yourself as a husband and wife, then you are a husband and wife, and you're entitled to some of the same protections as a married couple. But we don't have common law marriage in Washington state. We do have what's called a committed intimate relationship. A committed intimate relationship is very similar to common law marriage, but it's not the same. And the reality is, if you enter into a committed relationship, intimate relationship, and you're living together and you do so for a number of years, and then you do end up separating, that can create chaos because there aren't clear laws on exactly how assets should be divided amongst a couple who have lived together for a long period of time but did not get married. In fact, separation after entering into a committed intimate relationship is oftentimes much more difficult and much more expensive than a divorce, because a court will look at the circumstances surrounding that relationship in order to do a fair distribution. They'll look at how long did you live together? How are the bills split? Who paid for what? Was one individual dependent on the other? Did you have children together? So once again, we're going to circle back to, if you're going to cohabitate, enter into a cohabitation agreement so that you can anticipate the possibility of having to separate assets in the future if you were to get divorced or separated. Further, it's extremely important for you to become knowledgeable on the consequences of different manners of titling your assets. For example, if you and your partner, or even you and your spouse, buy a home together, the language on that deed when you purchase that home can have very different consequences should you either get divorced, separated, or if one of you should pass away. I have seen circumstances in my own practice as an estate planning attorney where a couple have purchased a home together, one spouse has died, and then the remaining partner, the remaining spouse, has had to sell the home in order to provide funds to the deceased spouse's children or even parents and siblings. So if you and your partner open accounts together, if you buy real property together, I would strongly encourage you to research and determine that you are properly titling those assets in a way that reflects your intent and your wishes. Finally, as an estate planning attorney, this is probably the mistake that I personally see the most. And that mistake is that a couple enters into a relationship together, but they don't create estate plans. Now, people sometimes aren't aware of the horrors that their family members can face if they themselves fail to create an estate plan. What an estate plan does is, number one, it's the opportunity for you to decide who will be the person who makes financial and healthcare decisions on your behalf if you are unable to make your own decisions. It's the plan that you put in place that says who will be able to visit you in the hospital if you were in a car accident or became incapacitated. And then finally, it's the way that you can decide if you die, how is your estate distributed? As you can imagine, if you get married or if you live with a loved one and you fail to create an estate plan, that's a recipe for disaster. For example, I have seen both of the following circumstances. I have seen a situation where an individual has gotten married, they have created an estate plan and named their spouse as the decision maker. And then that one spouse becomes incapacitated and has been hospitalized. And then the surviving spouse has isolated them from their parents, children, and siblings because they did create an estate plan, but it was a poor estate plan. It was not properly thought through. That individual became incapacitated and had a stroke, and their relatively new spouse then swept in, took control of everything, and completely disregarded the incapacitated spouse's children, did not allow them to visit their parent, did not allow them to talk to their parent, did not allow them to learn about their parents' health. And that's a possibility with an improperly drafted plan. I've also seen a situation where a young couple lived together. They lived together for many, many years. And one of that couple was in a car accident. They were hospitalized. And because they had not created an estate plan, the incapacitated individual's parents were the ones who were designated as his decision makers. They completely isolated their child from that child's live-in partner. They didn't allow that partner to visit them. They did not provide them any information. And that partner was left in the dark after having lived with this person for many years because the parents did not approve of that relationship. And because the incapacitated individual had not created an estate plan, had not designated decision makers, had not signed a HIPAA release, there was very little that their loved one, their partner of many years, could do to help them. Failing to create an estate plan can create problems not only for your partner who you live with, for the spouse that you live with, but it could also create significant problems for your own family members, your parents, your siblings, and your children. Meeting with an attorney and creating a comprehensive estate plan is one of the most important decisions any adult can make, but it becomes even more important if you are entering into a loving, committed relationship with someone else. Now, in talking about estate planning, it's a topic that I can talk about for hours, I feel. And here is just one tiny slide to discuss estate planning. Estate planning is a little bit like a pyramid. I tell my clients we always start at the bottom of that pyramid because the bottom of that pyramid are the tools that every single person should create as soon as they turn 18. Beyond that, if you are in a relationship, you very likely might need a will. If you have children, you need a will and a child's trust. If you are married and your plan is to leave everything to your spouse, you still need that bottom row. You still need that financial power of attorney, but you might also need a will, a child's trust, and a community property agreement. If you feel like you are not an expert on estate planning, then I'm strongly encouraging you to reach out to my office, and we would be happy to send you a webinar specifically addressing essential estate planning. The webinar is created by myself, and I go through all the tiers of this pyramid, and I explain the necessary tools of an estate plan and what each tool provides to you and why you need each tool. If you are interested in watching the webinar regarding essential estate planning, please reach out to my law firm and we would be happy to send you a link to that webinar so that you can further your education on this topic. Now, this next slide is not truly a mistake people make. It's just a reminder that if you and your partner are creating a blended family, and by blended family, I mean he or she has children or you have children and you are now creating a new family and you're bringing in children specifically from outside that relationship, then it's even more important for you to sit down and make sure you have addressed the mistakes that I've been discussing up till now. It's not unusual that without a proper plan, you can create a situation where your children are left with nothing, where your children are left unprotected and without assets. Therefore, if you are entering into a relationship and you have children of your own, addressing the aforementioned mistakes is extremely important and is a way you can make sure you've protected your children and their interest. Or alternatively, if your children are adults, it might be an opportunity for you to protect your spouse. But it's important for you to take advantage of the tools available to you to make sure your wishes are the ones that are followed, and that it's not the laws of the state of Washington that determine in what your life and how your estate might be distributed. So the truth of the matter is, in today's society, women are much more likely to benefit from a good plan or pay the price for poor or no planning. My hope is, whomever you are, you take a moment to sit back and think about if you and your current partner, future spouse, loved one have sat down and addressed all these mistakes that we've talked about today, to make sure you have put in place a plan that protects you from some of the tragedies that we see on a daily basis when families fall apart. So the future is in your hands. Now is the time. Now is the time to sit down and have these hard conversations. And now is the time to take the next step to make sure you have the tools to avoid a crisis. I encourage you to take advantage of our free personal consultation. Because you sat through this webinar, I will now be happy to sit down with you and discuss your particular circumstance, talk about what tools would best benefit you and your needs. That consultation is free for those people who have attended one or more of our webinars. And if you would like to meet with me, I would suggest you reach out to the office, schedule an appointment to come in sometime in the next 2 weeks. Clients and their families are part of our law firm family. That is why I created this webinar. One of my clients came to me and said, I see a need that's not being met. I have daughters. I made mistakes. My hope is that my daughters don't make the same mistakes that I have made. And it was based on this question that I sat down and said, you know what, that is an absence. There is a hole in our education. There's a hole in our society where people don't always know what are the things they should consider when making these important life decisions. If you're a client of mine and you would like me to meet with one of your children, I would be happy to do so. So if you're not ready to move forward right now, you're still more than welcome to reach out to our law firm, and you could join our e-newsletter where we further discuss some of these pressing issues and keep you updated on any current critical changes of the law. If you found this webinar useful, or if you would like our webinar on essential estate planning or legacy planning, we'd be happy to provide those to you. And you're more than welcome to share this link with those people that you love and who you feel would benefit from this information. If you have any questions, then please feel free to drop us an email. We'll do our best to respond quickly. And once again, thank you so much for your time. I hope you found this webinar useful to you, and please feel free to reach out if you do have any questions.